I had been the least important person in the Iron Hall for 3 years, which suited me well enough, because it meant I could say anything I liked so long as I only said it to myself. And I said a great deal to myself. I was 22 that winter, a woman grown by any pack law you cared to name, and the sum total of my importance was this. I carried the ash out before the fires were lit, and I carried the water in after. And in between I scrubbed the long gallery above the war hall on my knees until the grey stone went the colour of bone. Nobody looked at me. That is not a complaint. An invisible woman hears everything, and I had learned that a person who is never looked at is free in ways a Luna never is. So I talked. Inside my own skull, where it was warm and no one could send me away for it. I named things. It was a habit I could not break and saw no reason to. The narrow back stair that ran from the kitchens to the upper corridors, the one that howled when the north wind found it, I called the throat, because that was what it sounded like at the dead hour before dawn. Something swallowing. The fat grey cat who ruled the buttery, I called the magistrate. The King's War Council, which met in the hall below my gallery and went in circles for hours, I called, privately and with great affection, the wheel that goes nowhere. None of them knew their names. That was the point. A named thing is a thing you have decided to keep, and I kept them all in the one place that was only mine. The morning it began, I had been sent to the North Chapel. Nobody used the North Chapel. It was the oldest room in the fortress, older than the hall itself, a low stone cell where the founders had done whatever grim founding business required a room with no windows. There was a grey stone set into the floor at its centre, smooth as a river pebble and the size of a sleeping cat, and the steward wanted the whole cell swept before the thaw, because a Margrave was visiting, and the Margrave was pious. The stone had a hollow worn into its top. Rainwater, I supposed, though there was no way for rain to reach it. I knelt to wipe it dry, and because my candle kept guttering in the draught, I worked the stone loose from its setting and propped the door with it to let in the corridor light. That was all I did. I moved a stone to prop a door. I have gone over that moment 1,000 times since, looking for the part where I should have known better, and there is no such part. It was a cold morning, the light was poor, and I wanted to see what I was cleaning. Any woman alive would have done the same. The stone was warm in my hands when I lifted it. I noticed that and thought nothing of it. I set it against the door, finished the cell, and went to scrub my gallery. And by the time the War Council filed in below me, I had forgotten the chapel entirely. The king came in last, as he always did. I had better tell you about him, since he is the reason you are still listening. Alaric of the Iron Territories was the strongest wolf alive, and he wore it the way other men wear a heavy coat, as something that kept the weather off and bent his shoulders both at once. He had ruled since he was 19, which is too young to rule anything, and it had set into his face the particular stillness of a man who had learned early that every door he opened, someone walked through to die. The court was terrified of him. The court adored him. The court could not have told you the difference, and neither, I think, could he. I watched him through the gallery rail, the way I watched everything, from above, unseen, free. The council took their seats. Einar, his beater, unrolled a map of the eastern passes. The wheel began to turn. I went back to my stone and my brush and let their voices wash over me. And somewhere in the middle of it, without meaning to, I looked down at the king again and had a thought. I had seen him once before dawn, you understand. Weeks earlier. I had come up the throat with the ash bucket and found him alone in the dark hall. No fire lit, no guard, standing at the head of the empty table with both hands flat on the wood, like a man holding a table down in a storm. He had not heard me. I had backed away and said nothing, and I had thought about it more than I meant to since. So when I looked down at him that morning, ringed by his counsel, every man in the room leaning toward him for the next word, I thought what I had been thinking for weeks without letting it finish. Every one of them is afraid of him, I thought, and not a single one has noticed that he is tired in the particular way of a person who has not been permitted to be tired in a very long time. He holds the whole roof up. Nobody has ever once asked whether the beam would like to put it down. And the king of the Iron Territories went completely still. Einar kept talking. The map crackled, and Alaric raised one hand, not sharply, just a slow, flat lift of the palm, and the room stopped as though he had drawn a blade. He did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice came out wrong, scraped down to the wood of it. "We are finished for today." Einar's mouth opened. They were not finished. They were an hour from finished, and the Margrave's passes were not yet decided, and I knew this because the wheel had a rhythm, and I had cleaned to it for 3 years. "My king." "Today," Alaric said again, and stood and left. I knelt above them with my brush dripping grey water onto the stone and thought, with the smug certainty of a woman who believes she is the only person in the room who is truly paying attention, well, something has finally cracked the beam. I had no idea, I want that on the record, I had absolutely no idea that I had just been heard. The candles were the first strange thing. In the throat, at the turn where the stair was darkest, there had lived for 3 years a single candle stub in an iron bracket, a wretched, guttering thing that never threw enough light to climb by, and that no one ever replaced, because no one of any importance ever used the throat. I had complained about that candle to myself every single morning. I had composed entire speeches to it. The morning after the council ended early, I came up the throat in the dark with my bucket and put my hand out for the wall. And the wall was gold. 3 tall beeswax tapers stood in fresh brackets where the stub had been. Good ones, the kind that burned in the king's own rooms, that smelled of honey instead of tallow. The stair I had cursed for 3 years was lit like a feast. I stood there in the warm light, feeling, for no reason I could name, as though I had been caught at something. I asked Maeve in the kitchens. Maeve had run the kitchen since before I was born and missed nothing that happened below the level of a man's belt, which was most things that mattered. She said the steward had given the order. She said the steward had been baffled by it. She said the steward had asked the king twice whether he meant the back stair, the maid's stair, and the king had said, yes, the back stair, and had not explained himself, and you did not ask the king to explain himself twice. Somebody fell down it, like as not, Maeve said, kneading. Some lord broke his pride in the dark, and now we all get candles. She looked at me sideways. Why's your face doing that? It isn't doing anything. It was doing a great deal. I went up the lit stair to my gallery and told myself, firmly, that the world was full of coincidences, and a girl who read meaning into candles would read meaning into anything. Then the king had me brought to the library. I had never been in the library. It was his room more than the throne room was, the place he went when the holding up got too heavy, I had decided, from the way the guards spoke of it in lowered voices. A page came for me at midday, with the message that I was to attend the king in the library, and the page looked at me as though I might be in a great deal of trouble, and so did everyone I passed on the way, and so, I will be honest, did I. He was at the long table when I came in, a book open in front of him that he was not reading. He did not look up at once. I stood inside the door with my hands folded and my chin level and waited, because I had decided on the way down that whatever this was, I would not let it see me flinch. He spoke to the book. "You may sit." "I'll stand, if it please you." That made him look up. I will tell you what I noticed, because noticing is the only thing I have ever been good at. I noticed that he had set the book down very carefully when I spoke, the way you set down a cup you have only just realised is full to the brim. I noticed that he looked at me as though he were checking something against a list he could not show me. And I noticed, this is the part I turned over for weeks afterward, that he looked faintly, unmistakably, like a man bracing to be insulted by someone he had decided he would let insult him. He turned a page he was not reading. "You clean the north gallery." "And the throat, the stair, the back stair," I corrected myself, because the word had slipped out and I did not expect a king to have any notion what the throat was. Something moved across his face. Gone before I could name it. "You will keep the library now." He closed the book at last. "It needs keeping. The last man let the damp into the eastern shelves." It did not need keeping. I could see from the door that it was the best kept room in the fortress. But you do not tell the strongest wolf alive that his pretext is thin. So I inclined my head and said I would be glad to. And I was halfway to gladly retreating when he spoke again, low, almost to himself. "It is warmer in here than the stair." I stopped. I had not said one word about the stair being cold. I had thought it. I had thought it that very morning, climbing the newly golden throat, that for all the pretty candles the wind still came through like a knife, and the king's library was probably the only warm room in this whole stone heart of a fortress, and what I would not give to keep one warm room. I had thought it, I had not said it. "Yes." I made myself hold his eyes. "It is." He held my eyes a beat too long, and then he let me go. If you have stayed with me this far, stay a little longer, because the next part is the part I still cannot tell without my hands going cold, and I would rather not tell it alone. If this story has its hooks in you, you know where the bell is. Ring it, and come back to me. Now, the library. I want to be fair to myself because hindsight makes fools of all of us, and I refuse to be made a fool of twice. I did not work it out for nearly a fortnight, and I had reasons. For one, the thing was impossible. For another, a person does not leap straight to, "he can hear my thoughts." A sane person exhausts every other explanation first, and I am, whatever else, a sane person. I decided he had spies. I decided I talked in my sleep, and some chambermaid reported it. I decided I had said things aloud without knowing, the way lonely people do, and he had simply overheard me in a corridor. I decided all of that, and then I tested it, the way you test ice you have already half decided to walk on. We fell into a kind of rhythm, the king and I. I kept his library, which is to say, I moved books an inch to the left and dusted shelves that held no dust. And he came to it more and more, to read the books he did not read. And we did not speak of anything that mattered, and we spoke, somehow, for hours. He was, and I did not have the word for it then, so I will give you the one I found later. He was fighting something. Badly. He would say a thing warm enough to startle us both, and then spend the next quarter hour being twice as cold to make up for it. He would do something kind and then look furious about it, at himself, never at me. Once he reached the high shelf for a book I could not have reached in a year of trying, and set it by my hand without a word, and then stood at the window with his back to me, as though he had committed a crime. I thought he was a strange and lonely man who had decided, for reasons of his own, to be strange and lonely at me. I did not entirely mind. I had been invisible for 3 years. Being someone's strange and lonely habit was, God help me, a promotion. And then Lady Ingrith came to the library, and the floor of the whole thing tilted. Lady Ingrith was cousin to the king's late mother, and had spent the years since arranging the future like furniture. She had a niece, Yrsa, pale and well-trained and silent, whom she intended to make lunar, because an alliance with Yrsa's father's holdings would close the eastern passes the council kept circling. Ingrith was not a stupid woman. Stupid women are easy. Ingrith was patient and exact, and she had noticed, before I had let myself notice it, that the king had begun spending his afternoons in a library with a maid. She came in while I was shelving. She did not look at me. I was beneath looking at. But she spoke to the king in the bright, carrying voice the highborn use when they mean a servant to hear. "They are saying in the hall," she said, "that the king has taken an interest in the help. I told them it was beneath you. I do hope I was not made a liar." I kept shelving. Inside my skull, where it was safe, I thought, she has a face like a locked box and a voice like the key turning, and she has come here to see whether I will flinch, and I will sooner swallow the dust off these shelves than give her that. Alaric set down his book. "Lady Ingrith," he said, "the maid keeps my library better than the last 3 men I trusted with it. If the hall wishes to gossip about my shelving, the hall has too little to do, and I will find it work." It was not warm. It was nothing a court could pin to him, but Ingrith's eyes flicked, just once, to me, the beneath looking at. And I understood that she had heard, under the cool words, the thing the king himself did not yet know he was saying. And I understood that she had decided, in that one flick of the eyes, that I was a problem to be solved. She left. The king looked at the door she had gone through for a long time. He watched the door she had gone through. "She means to be rid of you," I gathered. "I will not let her." I should have felt grateful. What I felt, standing there with a book in my hands, was the cold, clean certainty that something was very wrong. Because no king in the history of the world has ever spent this much trouble on the woman who carries his ash. Why? Not a question. A door I was opening to see what came through. And Alaric, who could hold a war council in his fist, who had not flinched at the door Ingrith slammed. Alaric looked at me with the expression of a man at the top of a stair that has just turned into the throat, and could not answer. I went up to my old gallery that night, the way you go back to a thing that used to be simple. I sat on the cold stone in the dark, above the empty war hall, and I thought it all through. Every candle, every reached book, every warm thing he had said and flinched from, the stare he should not have known the name of, the cold he should not have known I felt. And because I am a thorough woman, I ran the only test that could not lie. I sat in the dark, alone, no one within 3 floors of me, and I thought, as clearly and deliberately as I have ever thought anything. If you can hear me, Alaric, you are going to have to do something about it. Because I am not going to spend the rest of my life pretending I do not know. Nothing happened. Of course nothing happened. He was asleep, or in his rooms, or being a king somewhere. And I felt absurd. And I climbed down the throat in the gold candlelight, feeling like a woman who had asked the moon a question. He was at the bottom of the stair. He had a cloak thrown on over his nightclothes, and his feet were bare on the cold stone, and he had clearly come at a run. And he stood there in the candle glow I had cursed, and he had answered, breathing as though he had carried something heavy up several flights, and he looked at me with his whole armour gone. "I can hear you," he said. "I have been able to hear you since the morning you moved the stone. I did not know how to tell you. I do not know how to stop." The world went very quiet and very loud at once. Every thought I had had since the North Chapel arranged itself in front of me in a long, bright, humiliating row. Every name I had given things, every dry remark I had made about the wheel that goes nowhere, every complaint about the candle, and here my stomach dropped through the floor, every soft and unforgivable thing I had thought about him without ever meaning a living soul to know. The tired beam, the held door, the warm room I would not give up. He had heard all of it. "How long?" I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to. "Since the stone. The council, the first day. You stopped the council because you said a true thing about me," he said, "that no one has said in 11 years, and you said it to yourself, and you did not even know you were saying it, and I could not sit in that room another moment with my heart in my throat in front of 40 men." I sat down on the bottom step. It seemed the only sensible thing to do. He lowered himself to the cold floor across from me, a king sitting on the ground in the maid's stair, and he told me the rest of it. The stone in the North Chapel was old, older than the hall, a hearing stone, the founders had called it, set there as a punishment for a king of the first line who had wanted to know his people's hearts. The magic gave him exactly that. It nearly killed him. A wolf is not built to carry another mind. The founders sealed the stone and warned that whoever woke it would bind the first ear to hear its silence, and that the first ear, always, in any hall, would be the strongest wolf alive. "You woke it," he said, "and the first ear was mine. And it's killing you." He was quiet a beat too long. "It is loud," he said, which was not no. I have been angry many times in my life. I have rarely been angry the way I was angry on that stair. A clean, towering, glorious anger that had nowhere to go, because the man I wanted to throw a bucket at had not chosen this any more than I had, and had spent a fortnight lighting my way and warming my room and standing between me and Ingrith, all while drowning in the noise of a stranger's every thought, and trying, in his graceless, flinching way, to be kind about it. "You absolute fool! You could have told me the first day." "And said what?" For the first time, something like a smile moved at the edge of him. "Forgive me. I am the strongest wolf alive, and I can hear you call my counsel the wheel that goes nowhere. It is a very good name for it. It is the best name for it. I have not been able to look at that table since." And I laughed. I could not help it, sitting on the cold step in the gold light with the impossible, ruined, honest fact of him in front of me. I laughed, and after a moment, like a man remembering how, so did he. That was the night I stopped being able to pretend it was nothing. Not because of the laughing, because when he laughed, he looked, for one unguarded breath, exactly like the man I had decided weeks ago that nobody had ever once asked to put the roof down. And I understood that I had not been wrong about him. I had only been wrong about whether he could hear me thinking it. Ingrith moved against me the following week, and she moved well. She did not accuse me of being a maid the king favoured. That was too small, and would only have made me a sympathetic figure. She accused me of being a witch. She had it half right, which is what made it deadly. She stood up in the great hall before the assembled court, with the pious Margrave watching, and the niece, Yrsa, pale at her side. And she said that the king had not been himself for a month, that he ended councils early and abandoned his duties and lit candles in maids' stairs, and that everyone had seen it. And that the change had begun the very morning a certain scullery maid had been sent alone into the oldest, cursed room in the fortress. She said the word ensorcelled. She said the old stone had been disturbed. She said there were rites, ancient and certain, for cleansing a hall of a witch, and that the safety of the king demanded one. And the terrible thing, the thing that turned the court's faces to me one by one, was that all of it was true. I had been in the chapel. I had moved the stone. The king had not been himself. I had no defence that was not the actual, unbelievable truth. And the actual, unbelievable truth, that I had accidentally given the king my every thought, and he had answered with candles, was not a thing I could say in a hall full of men with swords. The king could have ended it with a word. He did not get the chance. The Margrave, pious and useful, and exactly the ally the Eastern passes required, spoke first, and said that if there was a cursed stone and a cleansing rite, then in the sight of the old law it must be performed, and no king was above the old law, and to refuse it was to admit the witch had her hooks in him already. I watched Alaric understand that the trap had closed. To save me with his authority would prove Ingrith's case. To let the rite proceed. What does the rite require? The hall turned. A maid had spoken. Ingrith's mouth thinned with something that was almost pleasure.
The source of the curse, she said, returned to the stone, and the stone closed over her. So, that was the shape of it. The rite would close the hearing stone, which had to be closed, I understood now, before it burned out the king's wolf entirely. And it would do it by feeding it the woman who woke it. Ingrith got her cleansing, her niece got her throne, the king got his mind back, and I got the founder's cold, dark cell with a stone over it, neat as a locked box. She was, I had said it myself, not a stupid woman. I'll do it. The whole hall, including the king, said no, his loudest of all, on his feet now, the armour back on and useless. But I had already done the only thing left to a woman with no rank and no defence, and one good test left to run. I had thought, where only he could hear me, the stone has to close or it kills you. I am the only one who can close it. Let me do the brave thing in front of all these people, Alaric, and then come and get me out, because I have just found one warm room, and I am not finished with it yet. His face did the thing it had been trying not to do for a month. They took me down to the North Chapel at dusk, the court trailing behind to witness, Ingrith at the front, the Margrave murmuring the old words from a book. The grey stone sat in its setting where I had returned it. They made me kneel at it and put my hands into the worn hollow, and the priest of the rite began, and the cold came. I have no good words for the cold. It was not the cold of winter. It was the cold of the founder's punishment, of old magic that had been told to wait in the dark and was glad, at last, to be fed something living. It drove up through my hands and into the long bones of my arms and reached for the warm centre of me, and the stone began, faintly, to take. I felt my thoughts thinning, going pale, the way the candle in the throat had gone pale before someone replaced it. I gripped the edge of the setting where it had cracked, and the cracked stone bit my palm, and I welcomed the blood because pain was warm, and the cold was trying to tell me I had never been warm in my life. It would have closed over me. I want you to understand that. The rite was real, and it was working, and I was going under.
What Ingrith had not accounted for, what no one in that cell had accounted for, because none of them knew the curse ran two ways, was that the king could hear me. And what he heard, as the cold took the top off my thoughts, was a woman trying very hard, for his sake, to be brave about dying, and failing, at the very end, to keep the fear out where he could not hear it. He came across that cell like a wolf, and he put his hands into the hollow over mine. "It binds to the strongest ear," he said, to the priest, to the Margrave, to Ingrith, to the whole witnessing court. "It always has. You have been trying to close it over the wrong person." And he gave the stone what it truly wanted. Not the maid who woke it, the wolf who had been carrying it. The cold turned on him like a tide, and I felt it leave my bones and pour into his, and I felt him take it without a sound, the way he took everything, alone, where no one had ever once offered to help. That was the part Ingrith got wrong, and it was the part I would not allow. I did not let go of his hands. "No," I said out loud, to the cell, to the magic, to the founders rotting in their old dark. "Not alone. He does not do the next thing alone." I held on, and I let the cold come back into me, half of it, the share that was mine, and I matched him breath for freezing breath with my bleeding hand locked over his in the hollow of the stone. And between the two of us, the strongest wolf alive and the least important woman in his hall, we were enough to close it. The stone took what it was owed from both of us and went quiet, truly quiet, sealed, cold, dead, done. I came back to myself on the chapel floor, with his cloak around me and his hands chafing warmth back into my ruined palm, and his voice saying my name over and over, like a man who has just learned the word. The court was still there. The Margrave was white, and Lady Ingrith was already talking, already turning it, already saying that this proved the bewitchment, that the king had thrown himself onto a cursed stone for a maid before the eyes of the whole. "Lady Ingrith." I got my feet under me. I was bleeding and frozen, and I had a king's cloak dragging in the dust, and I had never in my life felt more like standing. The hall went quiet, for me the way it went quiet for him, and I understood at last that being heard and being feared are nearer kin than anyone admits. "You said the curse changed him a month ago." The hall had gone quiet for me, and I used it. "You are right, it did. For 11 years this man held up your roof alone, and not one of you ever asked him whether the beam was tired. A stone made him hear one person who noticed, and you called it witchcraft, because the only thing your kind cannot forgive is being seen to need." I let that sit in the cold cell. The stone is closed. There is no witch. There is only a woman who moved a rock to prop a door, and a king who would rather take the cold himself than let her carry it. If that is bewitchment, my lady, then I pity every man you have never once enchanted. Nobody said anything. Yrsa, the pale niece, was looking at her aunt with an expression I had never seen her permitted to wear. The Margrave closed his book, and Alaric, on his knees on the chapel floor, bleeding and frozen and free of the loudest thing he had carried in 11 years, began, helplessly, to laugh. And the strongest wolf alive, laughing on the ground in front of his entire terrified court, did more to undo Ingrith than any words of mine. He stood. He took my unbroken hand, and in front of the Margrave and the court and the locked box of a woman who had tried to feed me to the dark, he said the thing he had been unable to say in a warm library with no one listening. "I cannot hear you any more," he said, low, only the front rows close enough to catch it. "The stone is closed." I will never hear another thought of yours as long as I live." His mouth did the unguarded thing. I find I am going to have to ask, every day, like an ordinary man. I have never wanted anything so much in my life. I will not describe the kiss, except to say that it was the first thing in 3 years I did not narrate to myself, because for once there was nothing to say to the dark that the light did not already know.
There was fallout, of course. There is always fallout. Ingrith was not executed. Alaric was many things, but not a man who answered patience with blood. But she was stripped of her place at court and sent to her own holdings under guard, which, for a woman who had arranged the future like furniture, was very nearly the same as death. The Margrave, to his credit, decided that a king willing to die on a stone for a kitchen maid was a king worth an alliance after all, and the eastern passes closed without anyone marrying Yrsa, who went home looking, for the first time, like someone who had been let out of a locked box of her own. The court did not transform overnight. There were whispers. There were lords who could not look at me, and lords who looked at me too long, and a beater named Einar, who took 1 entire month to stop calling me the maid, and another to start, very stiffly, calling me my Luna, as though the words might bite him. But the candles in the throat were never let go out again. It is a year now, near enough, since I moved a stone to proper door. I keep the library still. I refuse to give it up. It is mine, the warm room I would not surrender. And now it is ours, and Alaric reads in it the books he actually reads, while I move others an inch to the left out of pure habit. The council still meets in the hall below the gallery. I have heard him, more than once, on the edge of calling it the wheel that goes nowhere, in front of Einar, and catch himself, and look up at the gallery, where I am usually not, and grin like a boy. He cannot hear me. He will never hear me again. And I have watched him learn, this whole long, ordinary year, to do the thing the stone did for him by force. To notice. To read the small, specific, true things off a person's face the way I have always read them, because I had to, because no one was ever going to ask. He is bad at it, and getting better. He asks me what I am thinking 8 times a day, like an ordinary man, like he promised. And most days I tell him, and some days I make him work for it, because a woman is entitled to keep 1 or 2 things in the place that is only hers. Last week, the wind found the throat at the dead hour and made the old swallowing sound, and Alaric, half asleep, said into the dark, "The throat is loud tonight." My word, my private name, the one I gave a cold stare 3 years before he knew I existed, a word the stone took from my head and gave to his, and then took away again forever. He had remembered it, on his own, like an ordinary man. I lay there in the warm and did not say anything, because some things you keep for the dark, and this one I am keeping for myself. That is the whole of it. The curse I woke by accident, the king who heard everything and answered with candles, the locked box of a woman who called it witchcraft, and the warm room I would not give up. I have wondered, this whole year, how much of it you saw coming, and how much landed the way it landed on me, sideways, in the dark, at the bottom of a stair I had cursed every morning of my life. So tell me, did you know the moment he stopped the council, or did it take you as long as it took me? Sit with me a while in the comments and say where you are listening from tonight, and whether anyone has ever, even once, asked whether your beam was tired. If this found you and warmed a cold room, stay, light the bell, keep the candle, and I will have another story for you when the wind comes back down the throat. Stay warm. I will be here.